Welcome to Wisdom of Legend. Today we're going to go into the widely known speech, first delivered in 1994 in Professor Guilford Babcock's business class at the University of Southern California, was subsequently published in the Outstanding Investor Digest on May 5, 1995. In this sharing, Mr. Charlie Munger, with his unique wisdom, deeply analyzed various aspects, from the pitfalls of academic education to the mysteries of human psychology, from cultivating everyday judgment to the strategies of corporate management. He incisively revealed how mental biases affect business success and failure, and provided an extraordinary set of guiding principles for investment decisions, business management, and even choices in personal life, the latter he believed being particularly crucial. I firmly believe that the time you invest here will quickly yield rich returns through a significant improvement in your decision-making abilities. Mental models, diverse perspectives for discerning truth. Today, I want to guide everyone to break away from traditional learning patterns and collectively explore an ancient art, which I call general wisdom. This wisdom is the essence of wise judgment in the vast universe. Why am I so interested in this? Because I perceive that the contemporary education system rarely imparts this knowledge, and even when it does, its effectiveness often leaves much to be desired. Therefore, this speech will follow what psychologists call the grandmother's rule. You must first eat the bitter carrots before you can enjoy the sweet dessert. The carrot part of today's speech is a broad discussion of general wisdom, which is an excellent starting point. After all, modern academia advocates for general education first, then specialized study. I believe that, to a certain extent, before you become a true expert in any field, you indeed need a solid foundation. To emphasize this panacea, as I sometimes jokingly call general wisdom, I wish to instill a few fundamental concepts in you first. So, what constitutes basic general wisdom? The primary principle is, if you merely remember isolated pieces of information and try to awkwardly piece them together, you will never achieve true understanding. If this knowledge is not placed within a coherent theoretical framework, it cannot function as it should. Your mind must possess a series of mental models. You must rely on the framework constructed by these models to organize the direct or indirect experiences you acquire. Perhaps you have observed that some students attempt to cope with exams by rote memorization, and as a result, they struggle not only academically, but also in life. You must hang your experiences upon a conceptual structure composed of numerous mental models. So what exactly is a mental model? In short, the first key point is you must possess diverse mental models, because the psychology of human nature reveals that if you are limited to using only one or two perspectives, you will unconsciously distort reality to make it conform to your existing model, or at least to what you believe conforms. This is akin to a chiropractor who knows nothing of modern medicine. As the proverb goes, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That way of thinking is undoubtedly a disastrous self-limitation. The way a chiropractor treats ailments is also similar. Therefore, you must possess diverse mental models from different disciplines, because all the wisdom in the world can never be confined to the scope of a single academic field. This also explains why many professors within single disciplines often lack a broad wisdom. Their minds lack sufficient cross-disciplinary models. You might exclaim, "Oh my goodness, isn't that incredibly difficult?" But fortunately, it is not so arduous. For mastering 80 or 90 core models is sufficient to place you among those with universal wisdom, and among those, the truly critical models are few and far between. So let us briefly explore which models and skills. Essential foundation, mathematical, accounting, and engineering thinking, constitute the indispensable fundamental knowledge for everyone. Only with this cornerstone can one master a specialized art like stock picking. First and foremost, and clearly, is mathematics. You must possess the basic ability to handle numbers and quantities, which means mastering fundamental mathematics. Besides the principle of compound interest, an extremely useful mental model is the basic principle of permutations and combinations. In my youth, these were taught in the second year of high school. Nowadays, in better private schools, I imagine they start around 8th grade. This is quite simple mathematical knowledge. Pascal and Fermat completely solved this problem in just a year of correspondence. They casually figured it out in a series of letters. Mastering the principle of permutations and combinations itself is not difficult. The real challenge lies in habituating yourself to applying it almost daily in your everyday life. Fermat and Pascal's system aligns astonishingly well with how the world operates. It is fundamental coursework. Therefore, you truly must master this skill. Many education institutions have realized this, although their efforts still fall short. At Harvard Business School, all first-year students must learn a quantitative analysis method they call decision science theory. All they do is take high school algebra and apply it to real-life problems. The students are extremely enthusiastic about this course, astonished that high school algebra could be so useful in reality. Overall, it has been proven that people can't do this naturally and automatically. If you understand basic psychological principles, you can grasp why people can't do this automatically. The reason is quite simple. The brain's neural system has evolved through long-term genetic and cultural processes. It is not Fermat and Pascal's precise system. It uses very rough and convenient estimation methods. While it certainly contains elements of Fermat and Pascal's system, its operation is not ideal. In the mid-17th century, French nobleman Chevalier de Marais invited mathematician Pierre de Fermat to help him solve a gambling problem. Fermat and Blaise Pascal corresponded on this issue, laying the foundation for probability theory in their letters. De Marais gambled that in every 4 rolls of a die, a 6 would appear at least once. Based on experience, he knew he won more often than he lost. Later, he changed the gambling rules, betting that in 24 rolls of 2 dice, a 12, i.e. 2 sixes, would appear at least once. However, this new way of gambling was not as profitable as the original. He then sought the mathematician's help to clarify the reason for this change. Therefore, you must master this extremely basic mathematical knowledge and apply it frequently in your daily life. It's like wanting to become a golf player. You cannot rely solely on the natural swing granted by long-term evolution. You must learn and master a different grip and swing technique to fully unleash your golf potential. If you fail to integrate this fundamental yet not entirely intuitive mathematical probabilistic thinking into your daily life, then on your long journey, you will be like a one-legged person in a butt-kicking contest, effectively handing a huge advantage to others. For many years, I have worked with Warren Buffett, and he possesses numerous advantages, one of which is his natural ability to think using decision tree theory and basic permutation and combination principles. Clearly, you should also master accounting. Accounting is the common language of business activities, and it is a great contribution to human civilization. As far as I know, it was invented by the Venetians, and of course Venice was once the most commercially prosperous city in the Mediterranean region. In short, double-entry bookkeeping is an extraordinary invention, and it is not difficult to understand. However, you must have sufficient understanding of accounting to grasp its limitations. Because while accounting is the starting point of business activities, it is merely a rough estimate, and understanding its limitations is not difficult. For instance, it is common knowledge that you can roughly estimate the lifespan of a jet aircraft or other assets. However, merely expressing depreciation rates with fancy numbers does not mean you truly understand the actual situation. To illustrate the limitations of accounting, I often cite an example related to Carl Brown. Brown was an outstanding businessman who founded C.F. Brown Engineering Company, specializing in designing and building oil refineries, which is no easy feat. Brown was able to complete refinery constructions on time and bring them to smooth and efficient operation, which itself was a remarkable art. Brown was a true German, full of amusing anecdotes. It is said that he once glanced at a standard accounting report for an oil refinery and then vehemently declared, "This is bullshit."
So he dismissed all the accountants and gathered his engineers and told them, "Let's design our own accounting system for our business processes." Later, the accounting practices of the refinery incorporated many of Karl Brown's unique insights. Brown was a determined and talented individual, and his experience demonstrated the importance of accounting as well as the necessity of understanding the limitations of standard accounting. He also had a principle derived from psychology. If you are interested in wisdom, you should remember this principle, just as you remember the basic principles of permutations and combinations. He required all communication within the Brown Company to adhere to the 5W principle. You must clearly state who, why, when, where, and what was done. If you wrote a letter or instructed someone to do something at the Brown Company without stating the reason, you would likely be fired. In fact, if you made this mistake twice, you would be dismissed. You might ask, is it really that important? Well, this is also closely related to psychological principles. If you can combine a series of patterned knowledge and continually ask why, you will be able to think better. Similarly, if you always explain the reasons when communicating things to other people, they will understand your words more deeply. They will attach greater importance to your words and be more inclined to follow your instructions. Even if they don't understand your reasons, they will be more likely to listen to you. Just as your pursuit of universal wisdom should begin with continually asking why, when you communicate with others, you should also clearly explain the reasons. Even if the answer is obvious, clearly explaining why is still a wise practice. So which mental models are most reliable? The answer is clear. Those models derived from hard sciences and engineering are the most trustworthy thinking tools on Earth. And the theory of quality control in engineering, at least for non-professional engineers like you and me, is also an extremely important core component. And its foundation is precisely the basic mathematical theory of Fermat and Pascal. The cost of a project is so enormous, if you invest such a high cost, you certainly don't want it to fail midway. This all boils down to basic high school mathematics. Deming's quality control theory, introduced to Japan, was nothing more than the application of these basic mathematical principles. I believe most people do not need to be proficient in statistics. For instance, while I cannot precisely articulate the details of a Gaussian distribution, I understand its distribution shape and know that many real-life events and phenomena follow this pattern, so I can make rough calculations. But if you ask me to calculate a Gaussian distribution equation precise to 10 decimal places, I would be at a loss. I am like a poker player who plays very well despite not understanding Pascal. Incidentally, this is sufficient for daily life. But you must, like me, at least have a rough understanding of that bell curve. Of course, the concept of backup systems in engineering is an extremely useful idea. Fracture point theory is also a very powerful mental model, and the concept of critical mass in physics is likewise an extremely powerful thinking tool. All these theories can play a huge role in daily life. All these cost-benefit analyses, good heavens, are again just basic high school algebra. It's merely dressed up with some intimidating terminology to appear more sophisticated. You can easily prove this. Anyone in this audience who has seen a performance by a common professional magician will certainly have seen many things that weren't actually happening appear to be happening, and will certainly have missed many things that were actually happening. I believe the second type of reliable mental model comes from biology and physiology, as we are all, after all, genetically constituted in the same way. Next, of course, is psychology, which is more complex. But if you wish to possess any universal wisdom, the importance of psychology cannot be underestimated. The reason is that human sense organs sometimes short-circuit. The brain's neural pathways are not always unobstructed, nor does it possess infinite number of pathways. Therefore, those who know how to exploit these weaknesses, causing the brain to operate in certain incorrect ways, can make you see things that simply do not exist. This involves cognitive function, which is different from perceptual function. Your cognitive functions are just as easily misled. In fact, they are even more easily misled than perceptual functions. Similarly, your brain lacks sufficient neural pathways, etc., leading to all sorts of automatic short-circuit problems. So, when external factors combine in certain ways, or more commonly when someone, like a magician, deliberately manipulates you to cause cognitive confusion, you become a fool at their mercy. A person using a tool should understand its limitations. By the same token, a person using cognitive tools should also understand their limitations. Incidentally, this knowledge can be used to manipulate and motivate others. Therefore, the most useful and practical part of psychology, which I personally believe a smart person can learn in a week, is extremely important. Unfortunately, no one taught me. I had to learn it little by little in my later life. That was quite arduous. This principle is very simple. Once I had fully grasped it, psychology of misjudgment and dual-track analysis. I felt like a complete idiot before. That's right, I was educated at Caltech and Harvard Law School, so prestigious universities provided the wrong education for people like you and me. The fundamental part of psychology, which I call psychology of human misjudgment, is extremely important knowledge. It includes about 20 small principles, and they also interact with each other, making it somewhat complex, but its core content is incredibly important. Due to neglecting it, I made many absurd mistakes. In fact, in the past 2 or 3 years, I've made several such major blunders. It is impossible for people to completely avoid foolish mistakes. Pascal also said something that I think is one of the most accurate statements in the history of thought. Pascal said, "Man's mind is both the glory and the shame of the universe." Indeed, the human brain possesses this enormous power, yet it often malfunctions, making all sorts of erroneous judgments. It also makes people extremely susceptible to manipulation by others. For example, about half of Adolf Hitler's army was composed of devout Catholics. If subjected to sufficiently skillful psychological manipulation, humans can do all sorts of unbelievable things. I now employ a dual-track analysis. From a personal perspective, I have developed the habit of using a dual-track analysis. First, rationally examine which factors genuinely control the interests involved. Second, assess which subconscious factors automatically form when the brain is in a subconscious state. These subconscious factors are generally useful, but often fail in specific situations. One method is rational analysis, which is the method you use when playing bridge, identifying the true interests, finding the real opportunities, and so on. The other method is to evaluate which factors lead to subconscious conclusions, which are usually erroneous conclusions. Next, we will discuss another less reliable human wisdom, microeconomics. Microeconomics, market ecosystems, scale, and competitive dynamics. Microeconomics is another less reliable form of human wisdom. I found it very useful to think of free market economies,
or partly free market economies, as a kind of ecosystem. Unfortunately, not many people think this way, because ever since the time of Darwin, industrial titans and the like believed that the law of survival of the fittest proved their extraordinary abilities. As you know, they would think, "I'm the richest, so I'm the best. How righteous, by God." People reacted strongly against this attitude from industrial titans, so they were very reluctant to think of the economy as an ecosystem. But in reality, economies are indeed very much like ecosystems. There are many similarities between them. Just as in an ecosystem, individuals with narrow specializations can perform exceptionally well in certain niche areas. Animals can thrive where they are suited to grow. Similarly, those in the business world who focus on a particular area and become extremely good due to that focus often gain significant economic returns that they could not achieve otherwise. Once we start discussing microeconomics, we encounter the concept of scale advantage. We are now closer to investment analysis, as scale advantage plays a crucial role in the success or failure of businesses. For example, all business schools worldwide teach students that a huge scale advantage leads to costs decreasing along the so-called experience curve. People motivated by capitalism and seeking to improve production can make complex production more efficient simply by increasing output. The essence of scale advantage theory is the more goods you produce, the better you can produce them. That's a huge advantage. It has a big impact on business success and failure. Let's look at some scale advantages, although this will be an incomplete list. Some advantages can be explained by simple geometry. If you plan to build an oil tank, it's clear that as the tank increases in size, the steel required for its surface will increase at a squared rate, while the tank's capacity will increase at a cubed rate. This means that when you expand an oil tank, you can use less steel to get more volume. Many things are like this. Simple geometry, simple reality can give you a scale advantage. For example, you can gain a scale advantage from television advertising. When television advertising first appeared, that is, when color televisions first entered our living rooms, it was an incredibly powerful thing. The 3 early television networks had about 90% of the audience. Well, if you were Procter & Gamble, you had enough financial power to use this new advertising method. You could afford very high television advertising costs because you sold an enormous amount of product. Some small, weaker players couldn't do it because they couldn't afford the money, so they couldn't use television advertising. In fact, if your output wasn't large enough, you also couldn't afford television advertising, which was the most effective promotional technique at the time. So when television emerged, those already large, well-known companies received a huge boost. In fact, their businesses flourished and they made a fortune until some of them became bloated, which is what happens after getting rich, at least for some. Your scale advantage might manifest on the information level. If I were in some remote location, I might see Wrigley's chewing gum and some other brand called Gratz's chewing gum side by side on the shelf. I know Wrigley's is a satisfactory product, but I know nothing about Gratz's. If Wrigley's sells for 40 cents and Gratz's for 35 cents, do you think I would put something I know nothing about into my mouth for a mere 5 cents? After all, that's a very personal act. So, Wrigley's gained a scale advantage simply by having high recognition, which you could also call an information advantage. Another type of scale advantage comes from psychology. Psychologists use the term social proof. We are subconsciously and to a certain extent consciously influenced by the approval of others. Therefore, if everyone is buying something, we tend to think it's good, and we don't want to be the one left behind. This can be subconscious sometimes, conscious other times, and sometimes we consciously and rationally think, wow, I'm not familiar with this, but they clearly know more than I do, so why wouldn't I follow them?
So why shouldn't I follow them? The phenomenon of social proof arising from human psychology enables businesses to greatly expand their product distribution channels, and this advantage is naturally difficult to acquire. One of Coca-Cola's advantages is that its products are available almost everywhere in the world. Now, suppose you have a small soft drink product. How could you make it available in every corner of the globe? A global sales channel, which large corporations slowly build, is an enormous advantage. You might consider that if you possess a sufficient advantage in this regard, it will be very difficult for others to undermine your position. There's another form of scale advantage. In some industries, after prolonged competition, one company achieves an overwhelming lead. The most obvious example is the daily newspaper. In the United States, except for a few large cities, every city has only one daily newspaper. This is also related to scale. If my circulation accounts for the vast majority of the market share, I can secure the vast majority of the advertising. If I have a large amount of advertising in circulation, who would want to read that thinner, less informative newspaper? So it gradually becomes a winner-take-all situation. That's a unique phenomenon of scale advantage. Similarly, all these huge scale advantages allow for more specialized division of labor within companies, enabling each employee to perform their specific job better. These scale advantages are extremely powerful. So, when Jack Welch arrived at General Electric, he said, "To hell with it. We must be number 1 or 2 in every field we're in, or we'll exit. I don't care how many people I have to lay off or which businesses I have to sell. If we can't be number 1 or 2, we'd rather not do it." Welch's actions seemed ruthless, but I believe it was a very correct decision that maximized shareholder wealth. Nor do I think this approach is uncivilized, because I believe General Electric has become much stronger since Jack Welch. However, being too big also has its disadvantages. The double-edged sword of scale and the triumph of specialization. For example, I'm referring to Berkshire Hathaway, are the largest shareholder of ABC. Many publications under our umbrella eventually failed, beaten by competitors. The reason they could defeat us was their greater specialization. We used to have a business travel magazine, and then someone started a magazine specifically for corporate travel departments. This is analogous to an ecosystem. The narrower your area of focus, the better. So, their efficiency was much higher than ours. They could reach more people responsible for corporate travel departments. Moreover, they didn't waste ink and paper sending materials to travel departments that weren't interested in reading them. That was a more efficient system. Because we weren't as specialized as them, we failed miserably. The Saturday Evening Post and all those other publications met the same fate. They vanished.
We now own Motorcycle Monthly, which has a readership of a group of enthusiasts who love to participate in touring races and perform stunts on their motorcycles, but they are completely devoted to it. For them, it is the main purpose of their lives. A magazine called Motorcycle Monthly is an absolute necessity for these people, and its profit margins will make your mouth water. Just think about how specialized the readership of these publications is. So, scaling down and increasing specialization can give you a huge advantage. Bigger is not always better. Of course, the downside of large scale is that it makes competition more interesting because large companies don't always win. When a company becomes large, bureaucracy tends to creep in, and this attitude leads to perfunctory work, which is human nature. At this point, internal incentive mechanisms can fail. For example, when I was young, I worked for AT&T, which was a huge bureaucracy at the time. Who truly cared about shareholder interests or anything else? A rigid, sluggish bureaucracy is exactly like that. You manage a department, and we all have the right to handle this matter, so a tacit rule emerges. If you don't bother me, I won't bother you. This way, everyone is happy. Then multiple layers of management appear, along with unnecessary associated costs. Furthermore, when these management layers cannot be proven necessary, everything takes a long time to get done. They are slow to react, unable to make decisions, and nimble-minded people can only circle around them. The downside of large scale has always been that it leads to large, clumsy bureaucracies. The worst and most problematic bureaucracies are, of course, government departments. Their incentive mechanisms are truly terrible. This doesn't mean we don't need government, because we certainly do, but getting things done in these large bureaucracies is an extremely frustrating problem. So, people started looking for solutions. They set up decentralized small units and implemented excellent incentive and training programs. For example, large corporations like General Electric fought bureaucracy with astonishing skill. That person was Jack Welch. But bureaucracy is terrible, and as companies become very large and influential, some out-of-control behaviors can emerge. Look at Westinghouse Electric. They foolishly loaned billions of dollars to real estate developers. They put someone who had climbed up from the ranks, I don't know what he started with, maybe refrigerators or something, in charge of it. Suddenly, he borrowed huge sums to developers to build hotels. This was truly using one's weakness to attack another's strength. Before long, they lost billions of dollars. Columbia Broadcasting System, CBS, is an interesting example. It illustrates another psychological principle: Pavlovian association. If people say something you truly don't want to hear, that is, something that upsets you, you will naturally develop resistance. You must train yourself to overcome this reaction. It's not that you necessarily will, but if you're not careful, you very well might.
When television first appeared, the entire market was dominated by one company, CBS. Paley, former CBS chairman and media mogul, a famous American entrepreneur, was known as the father of CBS, almost like a god. But he couldn't stand to hear bad news, and his subordinates quickly realized this, so they only told Paley what he wanted to hear. As a result, before long, he was living in a world woven with lies, and everything else in the company decayed, even though it had been a great enterprise. All the foolish actions of CBS stemmed from this atmosphere. Bill Paley's last 10 years in power truly felt like a Mad Hatter's Tea Party. This is by no means the only example. Serious loss of control at the top levels of corporations is very common. Of course, if you are an investor, the situation might be very different. However, if you, like Paley, made so many acquisitions after acquiring CBS and hired so many foolish consultants, investment bankers, management consultants, and the like, these gained the scale advantages mentioned earlier, while on the other hand, it became as overstaffed as the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The people at the Department of Agriculture just sit there and do nothing. I don't know what they actually do, but I know they don't do many useful things. Regarding the advantages of economies of scale, I find the concept of chain stores very interesting. Just think about it. The chain store concept is a fascinating invention. You gain enormous purchasing power, which means you can lower the cost of goods. These chain stores are like numerous laboratories where you can conduct experiments, thereby achieving specialization.
If a small store owner tries to select 27 different products under the influence of a visiting supplier, he will certainly make many foolish decisions. But if your purchasing is done at headquarters with a large number of stores under its umbrella, then you can hire intelligent people who are experts in refrigerators and other goods to handle the purchasing. Small stores where only one person is responsible for all purchasing often end up in a bad situation. There once was a story about a small store piled high with salt. A stranger walked in and said to the owner, "Wow, you must sell a lot of salt." The owner's reply was, "No, the man who sold me the salt sold a lot of salt." So chain stores have a huge advantage in purchasing, and they also have a well-established system that dictates what everyone should do, which is why chain stores can be excellent businesses. Walton's history is very interesting. It started with just one store in Arkansas, while the most prestigious department store at the time was Roebuck and Sears with billions of dollars in assets. How did a penniless guy from Bentonville, Arkansas defeat Roebuck and Sears? He spent his entire life accomplishing this incredible feat. Actually, he only spent half his life because when he opened his first small store, he was already quite old. He played the chain store game harder and better than anyone else. In fact, Walton didn't innovate much. He simply copied all the smart things others had done, but he did them more fervently and managed his subordinates more effectively, so he was able to beat all his other competitors. In his early days, he adopted a very interesting competitive strategy. He was like a boxer fighting for medals, wanting to build a brilliant record to reach the finals and become the focus of television. How did he do it? He went out and found 42 vulnerable opponents, right? The result, of course, was win, 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 42 consecutive wins. The shrewd Walton essentially defeated other early American small-town retailers. Although his system was more efficient, he might not have been able to strike a fatal blow to those large stores. But because his system was better, it could certainly destroy those small-town retailers. He did this again and again, and then when he grew larger, he started destroying those large corporations. Well, that's a very, very shrewd strategy. You might ask, is this practice good? Well, capitalism is cruel, but I personally believe the world is better because of Walton. I want to say that you might imagine small-town life as wonderful, but I lived in small towns for many years. Let me tell you, you shouldn't think too highly of those small businesses destroyed by Walton. Furthermore, many of Walton's employees are excellent and capable people who need to support their families. I don't feel that low culture defeated high culture. I think that feeling is nothing more than nostalgia and illusion. But in any case, the interesting model of Walton shows us how much power can be generated when scale and fanaticism combine. This interesting model also illustrates another problem for us. Although Sears had a huge scale advantage, the overstaffed bureaucracy caused them terrible losses. Sears had numerous redundant employees, and its bureaucratic habits were very serious. Its thinking was slow and its way of thinking was rigid. If new ideas emerged in your mind, this system would oppose you. It possessed all the drawbacks of a large bureaucracy you can imagine. To be fair, Sears also had many advantages, but it was not as lean, demanding, shrewd, and efficient as Sam Walton. So, before long, Sears' scale advantage could no longer withstand the fierce onslaught from Walmart and other retail competitors. Here's a pattern that has always perplexed us, and perhaps you can solve it better. Many markets eventually become dominated by 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 large competitors. In some of such markets, no company makes money, but in other markets, every company does well. Over the years, we have always tried to figure out why competition in some markets seems more rational to investors, bringing significant returns to shareholders, while in other markets, competition is destructive, destroying shareholder wealth. If it's a pure commodity like airline tickets, you can understand why no one can make any money. We sit here and can imagine the benefits airlines bring to the world: safe travel, richer experiences, good times with loved ones.
However, since the maiden flight of the English Flyer, the world's first successful manned flight, the net profits for shareholders of these airlines have been negative, a very substantial negative. Competition in the airline industry is too intense, and once government deregulation occurs, it severely harms shareholder wealth. However, in other sectors, such as the cereal industry. Almost all large companies make money. If you were a medium-sized cereal manufacturer, you might make 15% profit. If you were very good, perhaps 40%. In my view, competition among cereal manufacturers is very fierce. They have many promotional activities, distribute coupons, and so on. But why do they still make so much money? I can't fully understand it. It's clear that there are factors of brand recognition in the cereal industry that are lacking in the airline industry. This must be the main reason why the cereal industry is so profitable. It's also possible that most cereal manufacturers have learned their lesson and won't go so crazy in fighting for market share. Because if a certain manufacturer were desperately trying to grab more market share, for example, if I were Kellogg's and felt I had to control 60% of the market, believing I could capture most of the cereal industry's profits, then I would destroy Kellogg's in the process of expansion, even though I might think I could grab that much market share. In some industries, businesses behave like a crazed Kellogg's, while in other industries, that kind of situation doesn't occur. Unfortunately, I don't have a perfect model to predict how that situation will come about. For example, if you observe the bottled beverage market, you'll find that in many markets, Pepsi and Coca-Cola can make a lot of money, while in many other markets, they destroy most of the profits for two franchisees. This must be related to each franchisee's adaptability to market capitalism. I think you have to know the people involved to fully understand how this happens. Of course, in microeconomics, you will encounter concepts such as patent rights, trademark rights, and franchise rights. Patent rights are very interesting. When I was younger, I thought patent rights were not cost-effective. More money was invested than received. Judges tended to deny patent rights because it was difficult to determine what constituted true innovation versus imitation of original products. That was not something that could be fully explained all at once. But now the situation has changed. The law has not changed, but the administration has. Now, patent lawsuits are resolved in patent courts, and patent courts are very supportive of patent rights. So I think those who hold patent rights can now start making serious money. Of course, trademarks have always made people a lot of money. If there's a very famous trademark for a large company, that's a great thing. Franchises can also be great. If a big city only has 3 TV channels and you own one of them, you can only broadcast so many hours of programming each day. So before the advent of cable television, you had a natural oligopoly advantage. If you acquired a franchise to open the only food establishment at an airport with exclusive customers, then you possessed a small monopoly. The great significance of microeconomics lies in its ability to help one discern when technology will help you and when it will destroy you. Most people haven't figured this out, but people like Warren Buffett have. For example, we used to be in the textile business, which was a very bad, undifferentiated commodity industry. We produced low-end textiles, which were truly undifferentiated commodities. One day someone told Warren Buffett, someone has invented a new textile machine, and we believe it's twice as efficient as the old one. Buffett said, "Oh my goodness, I hope this new machine isn't that good, because if it truly was that good, I'd have to close down the factory." He wasn't joking. What was he thinking? His thought process was this: this is a terrible business. Our profit margins are very low. We keep it open to take care of older workers, but we won't invest huge capital into a bad business again. He knew that better machines could greatly increase productivity, but the ultimate beneficiaries would be those who bought textiles, and the manufacturers would get no benefit. This principle is obvious. There are many excellent new inventions, but they will only make you waste money. Even if your company adopts them, they won't change your declining fate, because the money won't end up in your hands. All the benefits from improved production will go to consumers. In a city with only one newspaper, someone invents a more efficient typesetting technology, and then you discard the old technology and buy fancy new computers and the like, then your money won't be wasted and the saved costs will still come back to you.
In short, those who sell machines, and even employees within the company who urge you to buy equipment, will tell you how much cost using new technology will save you. However, they do not conduct a second-step analysis, which is to figure out how much money will end up in your hands and how much will flow to consumers. I have never seen anyone propose this second-step analysis. I always encounter these people who always say, "You just buy these new technologies and you'll recover the cost within 3 years." So you keep buying new things that can recover costs within 3 years, and after doing this for 20 years, your average annual return is less than 4%. This is the textile industry. It's not that the machines are bad, it's just that the money saved doesn't end up in your hands. Costs are indeed reduced, but the person who buys the equipment doesn't get the benefit of the cost reduction. This principle is simple, quite unusual, but often forgotten. In microeconomics, there's another model I also find very interesting. In modern civilization, scientific and technological progress is rapid, so there's a phenomenon I call the phenomenon of competitive destruction. Suppose you own the best whip factory. Suddenly, cars that don't need horses appear in society. In a few years, your whip business will be finished. You either start a different business or close down forever. You are destroyed. This kind of thing happens repeatedly. When new industries emerge, first movers gain huge advantages. If you are a first mover, you will encounter what I call the surfing model. When a surfer successfully catches a wave and stays on it, he can ride for a very, very long time. But if he doesn't catch it, he will be swallowed by the wave. But if people can stay on the leading edge of the wave, they can ride for a long time, whether it's Microsoft, Intel, or other companies, including the early National Cash Register Company, NCR. The cash register was a major contribution to civilization, and it's an interesting story. Patterson was a small retailer who wasn't making much money. One day, someone sold him an early cash register, and he put it on his store counter. This cash register immediately turned his business from loss to profit, because with it, it became much harder for the staff to steal money. But Patterson was a smart man. He didn't think, this helps my retail store. His thought was, I'm going to get into the cash register business. Naturally, he founded the National Cash Register Company. He caught the wave. He had the best sales system, the most patents, and everything else was the best. He was fanatically dedicated to all technological improvements related to it. I still have an early NCR annual report in my files. In the annual report, Patterson articulated his business methods and goals, which even a well-educated gorilla could understand. At that time, investing in Patterson's company was a 100% sure thing to make money. Of course, that's exactly the kind of opportunity investors look for. In a long life, you only need to cultivate your wisdom, seize one or two such excellent opportunities, and you will earn a tremendous amount of money. In short, surfing is a very powerful model. However, Berkshire Hathaway generally does not invest in those who surf in complex technology industries. After all, we are both quirky and old-fashioned, as you may have noticed. Warren and I do not believe we have any significant advantage in the high-tech industry. In fact, we believe it is difficult for us to understand the true nature of development in tech sectors like software and computer chips, so we try to avoid these things. This is precisely due to our personal knowledge deficiencies, which is also a very, very useful principle. Everyone has their circle of competence, and it is very, very difficult to expand that circle. If I had to make a living as a musician, assuming music were the standard of civilization, then I don't know how low the standard would have to drop for me to have a chance to perform. So you must understand your strengths. If you insist on playing games that others play very well, but you know nothing about, then you are destined to fail miserably. That is an absolute certainty. You must figure out where your advantages lie and compete within your circle of competence. If you aspire to become the world's best tennis player, you can start working hard, but you'll soon realize it's a pipe dream. Other skills are far beyond your reach. However, if you aim to become the best plumbing contractor in the Permian Basin region, about 2/3 of you could probably achieve that. It requires determination and wisdom, but before long, you will gradually understand everything about the plumbing business in the Permian Basin. Mastering this art with sufficient training is an achievable goal.
Some people, while unable to win international chess tournaments or compete on tennis courts against top opponents, can achieve great success in life by gradually cultivating a circle of competence. Personal achievement depends on both natural talent and acquired effort. Some advantages can be gained through effort. What most of us can achieve in life is merely to become excellent Permian Basin plumbing contractors, for very few people can win international chess championships. Some of you might have opportunities to surf in emerging high-tech fields like Intel and Microsoft. While we consider ourselves unfamiliar with that industry and completely avoid it, this doesn't mean that it's irrational choice for you to pursue it. All right, that's enough about basic microeconomic models. Add a bit of psychology and a bit of mathematics, and you have what I call the universal foundation of general wisdom. Now, if you want to move from carrots to dessert, I will talk about how to select stocks, applying this universal wisdom in the process. I don't want to talk about emerging markets, bond speculation, or anything like that. I just want to simply talk about how to pick stocks. Believe me, it's already complicated enough, and I will be discussing common stock selection.
Market efficiency, value investing, and tax strategy. First, what is the nature of the stock market? This question leads you to the efficient market hypothesis, which became popular, even rampant, long after I graduated from law school. Interestingly enough, one of the world's greatest economists is a major shareholder in Berkshire Hathaway. He started investing shortly after Buffett took over Berkshire. His textbooks always taught students that the stock market is extremely efficient and no one can beat it. But his own money flowed into Berkshire, which made him a fortune. So, like Pascal did in that famous wager, this economist also hedged his bets. Is the stock market truly so efficient that no one can beat it? It's clear that the efficient market hypothesis is largely correct. The market is indeed very efficient. It's difficult for any stock picker to achieve returns significantly higher than the market's average, simply by being smart and diligent. Indeed, the average result, by definition, must be a mediocre result. By definition, no one can beat the market. As I often say, the iron rule of life is that only 20% of people can achieve results better than the other 80%. That's just how it is. So the answer is, the market is both partly efficient and partly inefficient. Incidentally, I have a name for those who believe in the extreme efficient market hypothesis: neurotics. It's a logically consistent theory that allows them to do neat mathematical problems, so I suppose this theory is very appealing to those with high mathematical talent. However, its basic assumptions do not align with real life. It's the old saying again, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If you're proficient in higher mathematics, why not create an assumption that allows your skills to be put to use? The model I prefer, to simplify the concept of the common stock market, is the pari-mutuel betting system in horse racing. If you stop and think about it, the pari-mutuel betting system is actually a market. Everyone places bets, and the odds change according to the wagers. The stock market is similar. A horse with lighter weight, excellent win rate, good starting position, etc., is very likely to outperform a horse with a terrible win rate, carrying too much weight, and so on. Even a fool can understand this principle. But if the damned odds are such that the underdog horse has odds of 100 to 1 and the good horse has odds of 3 to 2, then using Fermat and Pascal's mathematics, it's very difficult to clearly calculate which horse will make money. Stock prices fluctuate in this way, so it's difficult for people to beat the stock market. And then the racetrack also charges a 17% fee, so you not only have to be better than other bettors, but you have to be much better because you have to pay 17% of your betting amount to the racetrack, and the rest is your stake. Given these figures, can anyone beat those horses purely by cleverness? Smart people should have some advantages because most people know nothing and just blindly bet on lucky numbers and such. Therefore, if the transaction costs charged by the racetrack are not considered, those who truly understand the performance of each horse, are mathematically adept, and are shrewd, have a considerable advantage. Unfortunately, even if a skilled horse bettor is very shrewd and can earn a 10% profit each racing season, after deducting the 17% cost paid to the track, he is still losing money. However, a small number of people do manage to make money even after paying the 17% fee. When I was young, I often played poker, and the guy I played with did nothing else but gamble on harness racing for a living, and he made a lot of money. Harness racing is a relatively inefficient market.
Unlike regular horse racing, you don't need to be very smart to do well. My poker buddy's job was to bet on harness racing. He didn't bet often. He only placed bets when he found mispriced wagers.
By doing so, even after paying the full track fees, I guess about 17%, he still made a lot of money. You'd certainly say that's rare. However, the market is not perfectly efficient. If it weren't for that 17% management fee, many people could win at horse betting. It is efficient, that's true, but it's not perfectly efficient. Some people, smart and dedicated enough, can achieve better results than others. The stock market is the same, except the management fees are much lower. Stock market transaction fees are simply the bid-ask spread plus commission, and if you don't trade too frequently, transaction fees are quite low. So some shrewd people, who are fervent and disciplined enough, will achieve better results than the average person. It's not something that can be done easily. Clearly, 50% of people will be in the worst half, and 70% will be in the worst 70%, but some people will have an advantage. In situations with very low transaction costs, the stocks they pick will achieve better returns than the market average. So how can one become a winner, relatively speaking, rather than a loser? Let's revisit the pari-mutuel betting system. Last night, by sheer coincidence, I had dinner with the president of the Santa Anita racetrack. He said that 2 or 3 casinos have credit agreements with the racetrack, and they now offer off-track betting. These casinos are actually performing better than the racetrack. The racetrack pays out money after collecting its full management fees. Incidentally, a lot of money is sent to Las Vegas, to those who win, even after paying the full management fees. These people are very clever, winning even at something as unpredictable as horse racing. Heaven has not granted humans the ability to master all things at all times, but if people diligently search for mispriced wagers in the world, heaven sometimes allows them to find them. Smart people, upon finding such opportunities, will bet heavily. They bet heavily when they find good opportunities and remain inactive at other times. It's that simple. The way to win is to work, 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 and work again, and hope to spot a few opportunities accurately. This principle is very simple, and based on my observations of the pari-mutuel betting system and my experience from elsewhere, it is clearly correct. However, almost no one in the investment management industry does this. We do this, I mean Warren and Munger. Others do it too, but most people have many crazy ideas in their heads. Instead of waiting for excellent opportunities where they can go all in, they believe that by working harder or hiring more business school students, they can be invincible in the market. In my opinion, this idea is completely insane. How many times do you need to spot opportunities accurately? I think you don't need to spot many times in your life. Just look at the hundreds of billions of dollars collectively accumulated by Berkshire Hathaway. Most of that money came from the 10 best opportunities. And that was a very smart person, Warren, who is much more capable than I am and extremely disciplined, achieving these results throughout his life. I'm not saying he only spotted 10 opportunities. I'm saying that most of the money came from 10 opportunities. So if you can think like a pari-mutuel betting winner, you will be able to get very excellent investment results. The stock market is like a gambling game full of nonsense and madness, with occasional mispriced opportunities. You might not be smart enough to find 1,000 opportunities in your lifetime. When you encounter a good opportunity, go all in. It's that simple. When Warren taught at business school, he said, "I can improve your financial situation in the end with a single punch card. This card has 20 slots, so you only have 20 chances to punch in, representing the number of investments you can make in your lifetime." He said, "Under these rules, you will truly carefully consider what you do. You will have to invest large sums in the projects you truly want to invest in, and your performance will be much better."
In my opinion, this principle is extremely obvious, but it is basically not mentioned in American business school classrooms because it is not conventional wisdom. It seems very clear to me that winners must be extremely selective when betting. I understood this principle very early on, and I don't know why many people still don't understand it. I think the reason people make mistakes in investment management can be explained with a story. I once met a guy who sold fishing hooks. I asked him, "My goodness, these fishing hooks of yours are green and purple. Do fish really bite them?" He said, "Sir, I'm not selling them to fish." Many investment managers act the same way as this fishing hook salesman. They are like the guy who sold salt to a store owner who already had too much salt. As long as the owner keeps buying salt, they can keep selling salt. But this doesn't work for people buying investment advice. If your investment style is like Berkshire Hathaway,
I'm not saying no one can do it. I just know that the wealthy people I know, and I know many wealthy people, don't do that. The second basic method is the one used by Benjamin Graham. Warren and I greatly admire this method, and we consider it a core element of our strategy. Graham used the concept of private ownership value, meaning he would consider how much the entire company could sell for if it were sold to a private owner. In many cases, that amount could be calculated. Then you would divide the stock price by the fraction of the company that share represented, and if the result was 1/3 or less of the total sale price, he would say you were getting a great bargain by buying such a stock. Even if it was a bad company and the manager was an old drunkard, the true value per share was so much higher than the price you paid, which meant you would get all sorts of benefits. If you obtained so much additional value, in Graham's words, you would have a huge margin of safety. But overall, when he was buying stocks, the world had not yet emerged from the impact of the Great Depression of the 1930s, which was arguably the worst economic recession in 600 years globally. I believe that after adjusting for inflation, the price of wheat in Liverpool, England, was probably the lowest it had been in 600 years. People took a long time to shake off the panic caused by the Great Depression, and Benjamin Graham was already using his Geiger counter in the ruins of the 1930s to search for stocks whose prices were below their value. And in that era, liquid assets truly belonged to shareholders. If employees were no longer useful, you could simply lay them off, take the liquid assets, and put them in the shareholders' pockets. That's how capitalism worked back then. Of course, what's on accounting statements today cannot be taken at face value because once a company starts layoffs, large amounts of assets disappear. Under modern civil society systems and new laws, a large portion of a company's assets belongs to its employees, so when a company declines, some assets on the balance sheet vanish. The situation for a small car dealership might not be like this. You might not need to pay for employee medical insurance or other benefits. If business gets very bad, you can take your liquid assets and go home. But IBM cannot, or chooses not to, do that. Look at what IBM lost from its balance sheet when it decided to downsize its workforce due to changes in mainstream global technology and a decline in its own market position. In terms of destroying shareholder wealth, IBM can be considered a model. Its managers were excellent and well-trained, but technology changed significantly, causing IBM to fall from the crest of the wave after 60 years of success. This was a rout, a vivid lesson that highlights the difficulty of managing technology companies, and it's also one of the reasons Warren and Munger don't particularly like the tech industry. We don't think we're experts in technology. Many strange things happen in this industry. In short, the problem with what I call the classic Benjamin Graham concept is that people gradually became smarter and those obvious cheap stocks disappeared. If you go searching with a Geiger counter in the ruins, it will no longer make a sound. But due to the nature of those with hammers, as I said, to them, every problem looks like a nail. Benjamin Graham's followers responded by adjusting the dial on their Geiger counters. In fact, they started to define cheap stocks in another way. They kept changing the definition so that they could continue their original practices. And it actually worked quite well, which shows how excellent Benjamin Graham's theoretical system is.
Of course, the most powerful part of his theory is the concept of Mr. Market. Graham did not believe the market was efficient. He treated the market as a manic-depressive patient who came to see you every day. Sometimes Mr. Market would say, "What do you think my stock is worth? I'm willing to sell it to you cheaply." Sometimes he would say, "How much do you want to sell your stock for? I'm willing to pay a higher price to buy it." So you have the opportunity to decide whether to buy more shares, sell what you hold, or do nothing. In Graham's view, it is fortunate to be able to do business with a manic-depressive patient who always gives you this range of choices. This idea is very important. For example, it has benefited Warren Buffett throughout his adult life. However, if we simply copied Benjamin Graham's classic approach without modification, we would not have our current performance, because Graham did not attempt to do what we have done. For example, Graham was even unwilling to talk to company management. He had reasons for this. The best professors express their ideas in plain, easy-to-understand language. Graham was the same. He wanted to invent a theory that anyone could use. He did not believe that just anyone could go and talk to company management and learn something. He also believed that company management often cunningly distorted information to mislead people. So talking to management was difficult, and of course it still is. Human nature is like that. We were initially followers of Graham and achieved good results, but slowly we developed better discernment. We found that some stocks, even though their price was 2 or 3 times their book value, were still very cheap, because the company's market position implied a growth inertia, and one of its managers might be excellent, or the entire management system might be outstanding, and so on. Once we broke through Graham's limitations and used quantitative methods that might have shocked Graham to find cheap stocks, we started to consider those higher quality companies. Incidentally, most of Berkshire Hathaway's hundreds of billions of dollars in assets came from these higher quality companies. The first $200 or $300 million in assets
we earned by searching around with a Geiger counter, but the vast majority of the money came from those great companies. Even in the early years, some money was made through short-term investments in quality companies, such as Buffett Partnership Ltd. Buffett's private investment partnership operated from 1957 to 1969, which bought American Express and Disney when their stock prices plunged. The situation for most investment managers is that clients require them to understand a vast number of things, whereas at Berkshire Hathaway, no client can fire us, so we don't need to please clients. We believe that if we find a mispriced wager and are very confident we'll win, then we should bet heavily, so our investments are not that diversified. I think our method is much, much better than that of typical investment managers. However, to be fair, I think many fund managers, even if they adopted our method, might not be successful in selling their services. Long-term holding, risk management, and investment philosophy. But if you are investing a pension fund with a 40-year horizon, then as long as the final result is very good, what does it matter if the process is a bit bumpy or different from others? So it's okay for performance to be a bit volatile. In today's investment management world, everyone not only wants to win, but also wants their investment journey to not deviate too far from the standard path. This is a very artificial, crazy intention. This practice in the investment management world is similar to the old custom of Chinese women binding their feet. Those managers are like the person Nietzsche criticized, who takes pride in being lame. That's truly hobbling oneself. Those investment managers might say, "We have to do that. That's how people evaluate us." In terms of the current business world, their statement might be correct. But to a rational client, the entire system is quite neurotic, leading many talented people to engage in socially meaningless activities. Berkshire's system is not neurotic. The logic is simple. Even very smart people in such a fiercely competitive world, when competing with other smart and diligent people, will only find a few truly valuable investment opportunities. It's much better to seize a few well-chosen opportunities than always to pretend to know everything. If you start by doing things that are feasible rather than impossible things, your chances of success are much higher. Isn't that obvious? How many of you can very confidently say you've spotted 56 good opportunities? Raise your hands. How many can say with reasonable certainty that you've spotted 2 or 3 good opportunities? End of speech. What I want to say is that Berkshire Hathaway's method is constantly adjusted and adapted based on real investment problems. We have indeed made a lot of money from many quality companies. Sometimes we acquire the entire company. Sometimes we just acquire a large portion of its stock. But if you analyze it, you will find that the big money comes from those quality companies. Most other people who make a lot of money also profit primarily from quality companies. In the long run, stock returns can hardly be significantly higher than the average annual profit of the company issuing the stock. If a company's capital return rate over 40 years is 6%, and you hold its stock for those 40 years, your return rate will not differ much from 6%. This is true even if the stock price was much lower than its book value when you first bought it. Conversely, if a company's capital return rate over the past 2 or 3 decades has been 18%, then even if you paid a high price for its stock at the time, your eventual return will be very substantial. Therefore, efficiency is buying those quality companies, which also means buying into the scale advantage, whose inertial growth effect you can imagine.
How do you buy stocks of these great companies?
One method is to discover them early and buy their stock when they are very small. For example, buying Walmart when Sam Walton first went public. Many people try hard to do this. This method is very tempting. If I were young, I would do it too. But this method of investing in startup companies is no longer useful for Berkshire Hathaway because we have too much money. Using this method, we cannot find companies suitable for our investment scale. After a company becomes significantly larger, it becomes very difficult to participate again because competition is very fierce. So far, Berkshire has managed to do it, but can we continue to do so? Which project will be our next Coca-Cola investment? I don't know the answer. I think it's getting harder and harder for us to find such good investment projects now. The ideal situation, and we've encountered this many times, is that you buy into a great company that happens to have a great manager. Because managers are important. For example, General Electric's manager was Jack Welch, not the guy in charge of Westinghouse. That made a huge difference. So managers are also important, and this can sometimes be foreseen. I don't think only a genius could understand that Jack Welch was more farsighted and outstanding than managers at other companies. Nor do I think only very smart people could understand that Disney's growth potential was enormous, and Eisner and Wells were very rare managers. So you will occasionally have the opportunity to invest in an excellent company with an excellent manager. Of course, this is a very fortunate thing. If you have these opportunities but don't seize them well, then you have made a big mistake. You will occasionally find that some managers are so talented that they can do things ordinary people cannot. I believe Simon Marks, the second-generation head of Marks & Spencer in the UK, Patterson of National Cash Register Company, and Sam Walton are such people. These people are not uncommon, and in many cases, they're not difficult to identify. If they take reasonable actions, and if these people usually make their employees more positive and intelligent, then managers can play an even more important role. However, generally speaking, it is more appropriate to bet on the quality of the business than on the quality of the management. In other words, if you have to choose, bet on the business's prospects, not on the manager's intelligence. In very rare cases, you will find an extremely outstanding manager, and even if the business he manages is mediocre, it is still wise for you to invest in it. Discovering undervalued opportunities, an investment management reflection. Another very simple effect, rarely mentioned by investment managers or anyone else, is the effect of taxes. If you plan to make a 30-year investment with an average annual compound return of 15% and then pay 35% income tax at the end, your after-tax average annual compound return will be 13.3%. In contrast, if you invest in the same project but pay 35% income tax each year after earning 15%, then your compound return rate will be 15% minus 35% of 15%, which means an annual compound return rate of 9.75%. So the difference is more than 3.5%. And for a long-term investment of 30 years, an additional 3.5% annual return will absolutely make your jaw drop. If you hold stocks of great companies for a long time, the saved income tax alone can add a lot of wealth to you. Even for a 30-year investment project with an average annual return of 10%, after paying 35% income tax at the end, it can still yield an 8.3% after-tax average annual return. Conversely, if you pay 35% tax each year instead of at the end, your average annual return drops to 6.5%. So even if the historical return rate of the stocks you invest in only keeps pace with the overall stock market and dividends are very low, you can still gain almost 2 percentage points of additional after-tax annual return. I have lived long enough to see many mistakes made by businesses. I believe that excessive pursuit of tax reduction is one of the common reasons for big mistakes made by companies. I have seen many people make terrible mistakes because they wanted to avoid taxes too much. Warren and I personally never drill oil wells, a large-scale tax avoidance method. We pay our taxes legally, and so far, we've done very well. From now on, whenever someone tries to sell you a tax avoidance service, my advice is, don't buy it.
In fact, whenever someone comes to you with a 200-page proposal and charges a large commission to sell you something, be sure to refuse to buy it. If you follow this Munger rule, you might occasionally make a mistake. However, in the long run, you will be far ahead of others, and you will avoid many unpleasant experiences that might make you resent your peers. For individuals, reaching the point of long-term holding of a few great companies' stocks and doing nothing has many huge advantages. You pay fewer fees to traders, and you hear less nonsense. If this method works, the tax system will give you an additional 1 to 3% return each year. Do you think most of you will gain a significant advantage by hiring investment advisors, paying them 1% of your returns, and having them try every possible way to avoid taxes? Good luck to you. Is this investment philosophy dangerous? Yes, everything in life carries risk. Because the principle that investing in great companies can make money is too obvious, it has almost certainly been overdone. In the great bull market of the 1950s, everyone knew which companies were excellent, so their PE ratios soared to 50, 60, 70 times. Just as IBM fell from the crest of the wave, many companies also lost their luster. Therefore, inflated stock prices led to huge investment disasters. You must always be aware of this danger. So, risk exists, and nothing is straightforward or easy. But if you can find the stock of a great company at a fair price, buy it, and then hold it for the long term, this method will be very, very effective, especially for individual investors. In the growth stock model, there is a sub-model. In your lifetime, you may find a few companies whose managers could significantly increase profits simply by raising prices, yet they haven't done so. Thus, they possess an unutilized pricing power. People don't need to think hard to know these are good stocks. Disney is one such case. Taking your grandchildren to Disneyland is a very unique experience. You won't go often. The country has a huge population. Disney Company discovered it could raise ticket prices significantly and visitor numbers would still grow steadily. So, Disney Company's great performance is certainly due to the exceptional management of Eisner and Wells, but it also owes credit to the pricing power of Disneyland and Walt Disney World,
as well as the sales of its classic animated films on videotape. At Berkshire Hathaway, Warren and I raised the prices of See's candies long ago. Of course, we invested in Coca-Cola, and it had some unutilized pricing power. Coca-Cola also had excellent management. Besides raising prices, Coca-Cola's top executives, Goizueta and Keogh, did many other things. That was a perfect investment. You will find discovering undervalued opportunities and investment management reflection. Some undervalued money-making opportunities exist where people are unwilling to price goods at a level the market could easily accept. If you find such a situation, it's like finding money on the street. The prerequisite is that you have the courage to trust your judgment. If you look at Berkshire Hathaway's major profitable investments and try to find a pattern, you will discover that we twice bought one of the two newspapers in cities that later became single newspaper markets. So, to some extent, we were gambling. One of those newspapers was the Washington Post. When we purchased it, its stock price was approximately 20% of its value. So, we purchased it using Benjamin Graham's method at 1/5 of its value. Furthermore, at the time, we had a strong conviction that the newspaper would be the last winner, and its management was highly ethical and intelligent. That was truly a dream investment, a superb one.
Its management was made up of very noble people, the Catherine Graham family. So this investment was like a dream, an excellent dream. Of course, that was between 1973 and 1974. That stock market crash was similar to the one in 1932. It might have been a major disaster occurring once every 40 years. That investment earned us 50 times its original value, referring to the time of the 1994 speech. If I were you, I wouldn't dare to expect to find an investment as good as the Washington Post in 1973-1974 in your lifetime. Let me talk about another model. Of course, Gillette and Coca-Cola both produce relatively inexpensive products and hold huge market advantages worldwide. As for Gillette, their technology remains leading. Of course, compared to microchips, razor technology is quite simple, but it's difficult for their competitors to achieve the same. So they are at the forefront of razor improvements. Gillette has over 90% market share in razor blades in many countries. Government Employees Insurance Company, or GEICO, is a very interesting model. It's one of probably 100 models you should remember beyond the usual. Many of my friends who have spent their lives salvaging struggling businesses have consistently used the following method, which I call cancer surgery. They look at the messy situation and see if, by cutting off certain operations, the remaining healthy parts would be worth keeping. If they find that there are indeed valuable parts, they cut off everything else. Of course, if this method doesn't work, they let the business go bankrupt. But it often works. GEICO's core business was very good. Although it was buried under a chaotic mess of other company operations, it was still functioning. Having been intoxicated with success, GEICO made some foolish decisions. They mistakenly believed that because they were making a lot of money,
They knew everything, and as a result, suffered heavy losses. They had to cut off all the foolish businesses and return to their original, extremely excellent core business. If you think about it carefully, you'll realize this is a very simple model, and it's been applied repeatedly by people time and time again. As for GEICO, it made us a lot of money without much effort. It's a great company with some foolish operations that could be easily cut off. GEICO hired some people with outstanding character and intellect, and it carried out drastic reforms. That's a model you want to look for. In your lifetime, you might find 1, 2, or 3 such excellent models. As for models good enough to be useful, you might find 20 or 30. Finally, I want to talk about investment management again. This business is particularly interesting because at the net value level, the entire investment management industry combined does not create added value for all clients. This is how it operates. Of course, plumbing installation is not like this.
nor is the medical industry. If you plan to pursue a career in investment management, then you face a very unique situation. Most investment managers are like chiropractors. Their way of dealing with this situation is to deny it deep down. This is a common way to deal with the limitations of the investment management industry. But if you want to live the best life, I advise you not to adopt this pattern of psychological denial. I believe that a minority, a very small number of investment managers can create added value, but I don't think intelligence alone is enough to do this. I think you also need to undergo some training. Once you spot an opportunity, go all in. If you want to do your best to provide clients with long-term returns above the market average, but what I've just discussed is limited to investment managers who choose common stocks. I haven't included others. Perhaps someone is proficient in foreign exchange or other businesses and can achieve excellent long-term performance that way, but that's not my area of expertise. I'm talking about how to pick U.S. stocks. I believe it's difficult for investment managers to provide much added value for clients, but it's not an impossible task.
Thank you for listening to Wisdom of Legends. Follow us and subscribe so you won't miss any interesting topics. I will see you next time.